All right, Matt Fee, thank you so much for being a part of this series with us. I want to thank you on behalf of the library and myself. To start, is there a few words you could just say about what people around the island know you for, to give you an idea of who you are to some people who may be unfamiliar?
Oh, first off, Dakota, I'd like to say I can see why you're comfortable here.
Yeah.
Why are you comfortable here?
Probably the chess. It's just I'm just such an intelligent,
Dakota
Mr.
is a very good baker, and he started in Florida. This was the original bakery, was right here.
Yep.
And I've sent you pictures. It was knocked down end of the 1800s.
Yep.
And there's pictures of the original brick oven was the last thing to go.
Yep.
And it made way for this
Courtyard right here.
courtyard, which is right here.
Yep.
So I think it's appropriate that you're here doing the interviews.
Yeah, it's almost like an honor of it to some degree.
Yeah, I've been here. I was born here in 1960. I've been here my whole life, other than a little bit of schooling, and I traveled for a while in the 80s. But most of the time I've been here. I'm on the select board. I've been on the FinCom. I've done, helped start soccer, helped start lacrosse, done a lot of different community endeavors. Mm-hmm. And I've owned Something Natural since 83, 84, and grew up with my family. They owned the Skipper restaurant and Henry's down on the wharf, so I've kind of been doing that since I was 12 years old or so.
Perfect time to kind of talk about it. You come from humble beginnings. You and your siblings grew up in a shack on the Jetties Beach. No electricity, sleeping in closets. Your father worked for the telephone company, but eventually your mother had different ideas. Can you tell me a bit about what your parents did during this period and what they did for the island?
During the early years?
Yep.
Yeah, we run a shack, and I remind you, the employees at Something Natural, the kitchen and the living area is the shack that we lived in. And it got moved from the Jetties Beach out to Fairgrounds. We had a house on Fair Street and then a house on Center Street, and my parents would rent that in the summer and move to a shack. It didn't have any electricity, everything was propane, and my dad worked for the phone company, so we had phone service. They ran a line along the dunes, The shacks aren't there anymore. It was in between the Jetties and Cliffside, and there were 3 shacks up in the dunes there. And it was kind of a great place to grow up, in a way. And but my mom was from Andover, Mass. And so whenever they went up there, they went to the sandwich shop, which was called B's Sandwich Shop. And whenever they went there, they'd stop there. And so they started to talk about, geez, wouldn't it be neat to do this on Nantucket? We should do a sandwich shop. And my dad was a telephone lineman, and that was considered, a really good job on Nantucket. It had benefits, and you got paid every week, like a lot of people didn't get paid. The summer people would leave and you'd wait all winter to get paid in the spring when they came back then. And so he was talking to Howard Jellamy, Carl Jellamy of Toscana, talking to Howard, and Howard said, Henry, you really shouldn't do that. If you're going to do that, you have to really put your heart and soul in it. You can't be at the phone company and, starting your own business. My dad's like, thanks, Howard, that was great. And he walked in the next day and quit. And Howard was like, what, you damn fool? I didn't tell you to quit. So he started, and the first day they did, I don't know, $10 or $15. And it was down at, down on the corner, which was the old blacksmith shop, which is where, I think it's Surfside is there now, but before it was Taco's Taco, down on Steamboat Wharf. And his first day he did $10 or $15, he thought he was rich. He's like, this is amazing. And then he didn't do more than like $3 for 2 or 3 weeks. And finally, because he was listening to a guy at the pharmacy on Main Street said, oh, people don't want to pay more than 50 cents or more than a quarter for a sandwich. And this is, 69, 70. And my dad said, well, if I'm going to go bankrupt, I may as well go bankrupt doing what I want to do. So he started doing, sort of sub sandwiches, and it started to do better. And that was sort of where they got their start.
And you guys had what? Skipper Sundays, Henry's.
Yeah, and then there was Henry's. Next to Henry's was Nantucket Wine and Spirits, and that was he was the original person that had that. And they had a Sunday shop. We had a bakery, and and they had the package store. He was pretty entrepreneurial. My mom was kind of the brains, and he was kind of the guy that would do all the things that she didn't want to do.
I heard a story about how your mom and I believe your dad and maybe even you and your siblings would go off island to various sandwich shops with a scale. Can you tell me a bit about that idea? What was their process for doing that?
Oh, it was, we were all embarrassed. Yeah. We couldn't get the same sandwiches. We all had to get a different sandwich. We couldn't get anything on it. So you couldn't get mayonnaise or anything because they wanted to pull the sandwich apart and put it on a scale and weigh it and see what made it good or not. Mm-hmm. And then if we wanted that stuff, we had to go back in and get it. And we were all sitting here, we were kids, and we were like, what are we doing, you know? But it worked out pretty well.
That's awesome. Your mom was a tough woman. Not mean, but tough. People that I've talked to say that you take after her. Do you find that to be true, and can you tell me a bit more about her?
I think she was a softie. She's kind of like I am. She's tough in some ways, mm-hmm. but she cared about everybody, mm-hmm. and she like sort of, but she has no baloney. Like you didn't cross her, you didn't do anything, you know. Mm-hmm. You know, she told you what she thought. You mm-hmm. know.
She had her mantras too.
Oh, she had a ton of them. I don't know if I remember all of them now, but.
I'm pretty sure she has there's 6 boats a day in regards to finding a new boyfriend or girlfriend or.
Yeah, well, that's what Dakota hears. I can speak to that. He hears that every day when he's complaining. I go, but Dakota, there's 15 boats a day now. Yeah. There's plenty of girls coming over. So.
I think she one time said to an employee of hers about the employee brought their boyfriend over, and they said that's like bringing a sandwich to a banquet.
Yes. Yeah. And she used to sit. The prep room was right overlooking the steamship, mm-hmm. so she was on the second floor watching all the boats come and go, mm-hmm. and so they had the view of everything. You didn't miss a thing. Mm-hmm. And if you're up there, you had to she'd only take kids that would work. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the girls she wouldn't want up there because they wouldn't work hard enough, the grinder girls. But the ones who were workers got to be up there and look out the window. And then she had all her tricks. Like if someone showed up and was talking to her that she didn't want, she'd pull the onions out and have them sitting across from her. She'd start cutting the onions right into their face. And they'd go, oh, I have to go, Sandra. Oh, that's too bad.
Or even boiled eggs.
Yeah, she would do all sorts of, she's.
Yeah. What's it, from what I've also gathered, your father seems to have been a bit of a showman. Can you tell me about his idea for the Skipper Singers?
Well, I'm not sure it was his idea. I think it was something that was just supposed to happen. They were doing, they had a bar, but it wasn't very busy. And it was an old, big old building it was a merry-go-round for a while and it had been something else, been a printing press, big open building. And they had the bar in there and it wasn't that busy. And so they had a guy who would come in on Sundays and play, and not much was going on. And so a couple of the guys that were working at the sandwich shop went to Harvard or Yale. They were singing for the Whiffenpoofs and the Crocodillos, 2 a cappella groups at the schools. And one of them said, hey, how about I bring my buddies down and we'll sing here on Sunday night because there's nothing going on anyway. Oh, sure, you can do that. So they walked around town and they sang to people. And my dad would go home every day at like 4 or 5 for dinner, and then he'd come back at 7 or 8. So he went home at 4 and had dinner, and he came back, and there was a line like out the door and down the street, and they had been singing all around the island, and he was like, and he had given them sandwiches that day. So he was like, oh my God, this is great. So that next day, he's like, hey, can you stay another day? And he bought him steak and gave him beer and wine. And so that they put it, and then they put it together for the next year, and they ran with live singers 5 or 6 days a week. They would serve tables, and then they would do their singing, and they were pretty incredible. A lot of them ended up sort of in the industry and were really, really pretty good.
You and another sibling would, I believe it was empty trash cans for the Skipper maybe when you first started, and then the other siblings would do promotion out on the beach. Your mother would say that you'd get paid in tuition, is what her...
That was one of the, yes. We didn't see a lot of money, let's put it that way. But we did get a lot of tuition, so we were very fortunate.
Being able to work at such a young age and work in like a family business, do you think it really instilled a work ethic for you later on in your life that you evidently have for something natural?
It does and it doesn't. Though I think I look back, it may have been a bit too much. We would come and work 100 days. We had a baker quit when I was like 13 or 14, and So she was older, and she left, and I didn't have to take my last 2 exams at prep school off island. They flew me back, and I sort of ran the bakery since. And so, there is a point where maybe there needs to be a little more balance, and it's also sort of how you are. I was just kind of that way anyway. I was pretty driven anyhow, so I would have done that probably anyway. But so I go back and forth. It
must be such an interesting life back then. I heard your mom would tell you that you could hitchhike to the beach, but don't hang around Main Street.
Yeah, no Main Street.
Yeah.
That was no, and we hitchhiked everywhere, or we rode our bikes and stuff.
Yeah.
And we grew up here, so we went to school at Academy Hill, right up the hill, and we, went down to the beach, and all my friends were the people who were on this side of the island. It was like, it was sort of the Worths and the Jellemies and the Welches and the Paradises, all the families that were on kind of this side. And the island was so different. It was, there was no bike path, there was no tarred road to Surfside. There were hardly any houses except the ones on the end.
Really?
Yeah, the island's built more houses in the last 30 years than it did in the first 300. It's incredible. So it's very much changed.
What's it, after leaving Harvard, you traveled to Australia for a year. What was that experience like, and how important is it for people to step out of their comfort zones and immerse themselves in a different culture?
I think it's good. I look back, and it was an adventure. I rode before I did that. I rode a bike down the East Coast by myself, and just met people along the way. And I was hitchhiking in the pouring rain in Cleveland, Georgia, and a guy picked me up and he goes, "Hey, I'm driving to California." I'm like, "Sure." And I threw the bike in the back of the you drive away, and went with this guy to California. And on the way, I stopped in Telluride, in Aspen, Colorado. So I worked there. I saw a good bakery, and I said, "I'm going to come back and work." So they drove this guy to California because I said I would, and I hopped in a bus and went all the way across the country and all the way back again. So it was, it was a different world, And I think then I went to Australia with a buddy from here to play lacrosse, and then we traveled a bit when we were there, and it was good to see a different world. I think it was, and I promised myself I wouldn't come back here. Like we've all got such a Protestant work ethic. It's like work, work, work. And you go over there, and they work a half day on Friday, and they have their weekends off, and they have a great, sort of, a lot of athletes and a lot of outdoors in Australia. And I said, "Oh, that won't happen to me." And then you get back here, and you fall into that. So every once in a while, I remember that.
Was there any memorable moments or experiences you had in your travels?
Oh, some I probably shouldn't talk about. I was young, but no, the best one I would say would be we snuck into the Perth Yacht Club the night the U.S. lost the America's Cup, and so we had won the Australian Lacrosse Championship, which was like the oldest trophy in Australia, and we had this big, silver trophy, and they had given it to my buddy and I, and we had the trunk of our car, and we climbed up a trellis into this yacht club, and we were like, oh my God, it was, a whole different world. We've been in Australia for 9 months, and we were like, oh, this is different. It was funny. So I remember, you can see the documentaries on TV now about our first loss there, and I still haven't found us. I'm looking in the crowd saying, okay, someday I'll figure it out, and I'll see us there. But
oh, that's funny. How was it playing lacrosse in Australia?
It was great, and it was everybody does something there. Like they're lacrosse players, or they're soccer, or they're doing, Australia's doing football or golf, and they're out doing something all the time. But it's different because it was not through the colleges. It wasn't through school. It was through clubs. And the clubs were like nonprofit, part of the different towns, like East Fremantle would play Fremantle, and there were all the different suburbs of Perth had different lacrosse teams and different teams there. It was pretty amazing. So it was they set it up differently, and they would teach the kids from the young age all the way up through. And some of the guys we were playing with were on the national team for Australia. The buddy I was with was on the U.S. team, and these guys were like some of the best players in the world, and they had, were playing among 4 or 5 teams in the west of Australia. It was kind of crazy.
You even picked up a job during your time in Australia. Is that correct?
I don't know if I would call them jobs. They tried to get us to work. We were in what did we do? We were in a biscuit factory. It was the equivalent of Nabisco here, and we were loading trucks with a bunch of surfers, and it would go back and forth on this belt and throw the cookies and stuff in. And the other job we had part-time was at Keneally's Rope, which was a rope factory, the biggest rope factory in the Southern Hemisphere. And I think our job was to clean out a bunch of stuff that had been there for 50 years that no one wanted to deal with. So they let the Yanks deal with it, you know.
So do you look back fondly on your trip? Do you think the youth of today should try to have these different experiences, go out, see other parts of the world, and kind of immerse themselves? And is that something that you think is important for growing up? And it's good to keep your kind of local roots tied to your community, but do you think it's also important to branch out and try new experiences? Do you feel like you did enough of that?
I think I would like to do more.
Of course.
But Sheila and I, is not really a traveler. She and I are not travelers necessarily.
Yeah.
But I think they should. But I also think that you have a lot you can see in America. There's a lot you can do here. I've gone on bike trips raising money in America, and that was amazing too. Going from Chicago to New York City on a bike, and you're at a slow pace, and you're meeting different people. That's pretty amazing too. So I don't think you have to necessarily go halfway around the world.
One year, Henry sustained some damage during a storm, and your mother gave you and your siblings something to remember. Looking back on your life, what is the phrase "never forget where you came from" meant to you?
Oh, I think that's some of the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're once you're poor, you're always poor.
That
was another one of hers.
Yeah.
Like that don't get too big for your britches. Make sure you treat everybody the way you'd want to be treated, and that it's not money that matters. It's it's how you treat people, and it's what you contribute. It's what you put into it.
Yeah.
Is sort of what her motto was. And she liked a lot of the sort of the people that some people would start, turn their nose up at. She liked the guys who were, blue collar and working and doing some of the jobs that, people might make fun of. So
if it was easy, everyone would do it.
There you go.
Another one, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Someone's been feeding you some good stuff, Dakota.
You've owned Something Natural for almost 40 years now. How has it evolved over the years, and what are some of the unique challenges and rewards of owning a business on Nantucket?
Oh, how has it evolved? I started out and I didn't really know what I was doing. I saw my dad, and he used to walk around and have a little notepad, and he'd make notes all day. And I thought, how hard could it be, And I got started, and I didn't know how to hire, and I hired a bunch of cute girls and thought, oh yeah, they'll work. And then they all left the first August, and we had nobody working, and it was doing really well, but there were a lot of improvements. So I would say the first, sort of 4 or 5 years was just improvements. It was the first year I was baking between 2 locations. I was baking for my dad on the wharf, and I was baking up here, and I was sleeping probably 3 or 4 hours a day and working the rest. And so eventually I got everything up to the cliff and brought all that up to code. It took, but it was, and early on I thought to myself, am I going to make it? Did I do the right thing? I got buddies who are lawyers and doctors and going to school and all this, and I thought to myself, what am I doing? And I was kind of sort of bummed out, depressed about it a little bit in the winters. And I would travel in the winter. I worked in Boston a little bit. I worked in Colorado some. I went down to Florida for a couple months, but I was looking, saying, did I make a mistake? What am I doing? And what I said to myself was, okay, I'm not going to let that negativity come in. I'm going to put my head down for 5 years. And if at the end of 5 years I'm still feeling like this, then I'll do something else. And so I really kind of, put my head down. And by the time I got 3 or 4 years in, I had kind of figured it out a little better. And then we were going. What I would say, Something Natural over the years we've kind of simplified. We used to do breakfast and coffee and muffins and catering, and we've slowly taken more and more stuff away as we've gotten busier, and we focus on the sort of some of the key things. And so that's been that's worked. for us. But it is a very different place, I would say, now. You know, the menu's pretty much the same, and you know, we still do a lot of the same things we've always done. We cook all the roast beef, and we make bread fresh every day, and we make cookies and things. But it's, you know, we still do all those things, but we don't do 3 cakes. We do 1 cake. You know, so it's sort of simplified, I would say. And there's more. Like it's harder to. I would say the challenge is all hiring and staffing. We employ 50, 55 people peak summer, and we house 35 of them. And if I didn't have housing, we wouldn't be able to do, you know, sort of a low price, high volume business. You know, we couldn't handle it. Without housing, we'd be stuck. And I think that's, you know, and that has, you know, my parents saw that way back, and I saw that. I've housed people since I started, but now you look around the island, and the town is trying to figure out how to house teachers and firemen and everybody else. It's, you know, for a while they were able to, you know, avoid this, the problems that we've all faced, but now it's sort of everywhere. So.
When you first started Something Natural, were your parents supportive of kind of you doing another, almost kind of like continuation of another restaurant business on the island, or? They
were until I started getting Best of Nantucket for sandwiches. Then they didn't support it.
Yeah.
And they would say the voters are wrong and the paper's wrong.
Yeah.
And they were proud, but they were not happy.
Had you not chosen Something Natural and during that difficult period of your life, what other path do you think you would have gone down?
Oh boy. I almost coached. I was playing lacrosse in Boston, and I was offered a job. I could have been a coach at Boston College for lacrosse. I could have been a prep school teacher, coached lacrosse there. My buddy. So there was things sort of lacrosse related, and then I thought about sort of going back to school, maybe, doing something between Australia and the United States. But I think I knew but it wasn't what I liked, because I always kept thinking about bread. And that's what I tell all you guys in the bakery, is like, if you've got a passion and it's something that your wheels are spinning when you're sleeping, and you're thinking about it, well, that's really what you should do,
Even though you didn't end up being a lacrosse coach, you still had a hand in helping start the soccer teams out here and the Nobadeer fields. Yeah. What was the process like for that?
Well, we did it because we would get kicked off. Back then there was football, and there was a coach here, Vito Capizzo, and there was no soccer, and it was ironic because he was, Italian and grew up in soccer world, and he was a kicker, so that's where did he get that? But it was sort of, there weren't enough people to field 2 teams, so he was very much football only, and so the people that did play soccer, we were getting chased from field to field. We played out in what's Raceway Drive, which is all houses now, but at the time that was Ralph Marble's property, and they landed planes there. So we would be playing in this big field, and the planes would come, and we would have to, get to the side, let the plane land, and we'd go back and play. And then down below there was, they were the trotters. They had the horses. So you'd have like horse racing at one side of it, and so with things like that. So the adult league started, back in the '90s, early 2000s, and that has been a huge positive for the island. It gives an outlet for a lot of different young men from all over the world that play together, and I think, so we helped, help do some of that back in the day. Yeah.
You've served on multiple boards for town government, including the select board, which you currently serve on. Why did you want to get involved in local town politics?
I started I saw an ad for the comprehensive plan, and that was the planning before we did a master plan. We did a sort of comprehensive plan, which was island-wide, and it was very public-driven. We had a lot of meetings, and very consensus-driven, and I really enjoyed that. And then I wanted to follow some of that up, so I ran for selectman, and I lasted, 1 term. I did 3 years, but I was too busy between Something Natural, and at that point I owned the bagel company, which was where the Green is. We have one location where the Green is. We had another here where Queequeg's is, which prior to that was my grandmother's house. So we had these 2 things going on, plus the cliff, and I just didn't have enough time, so I stepped down from the select board and drove my kids to soccer for a while, and then I came back on again, sort of 8-9 years later.
And what are some of the difficulties you face in working in local town politics? What are some things that everybody faces that people don't really know?
What they don't know, it's the complexity. I think we are we're not a small town anymore. We're a small city, and we have things that a lot of other towns. We have an airport, and we have we have an old folks home, and we have a lot of things that we have a landfill. A lot of these places will share a landfill. They'll share, we have a sewer plant. Some places are sharing the sewer with 6 or 8 towns. So there's that complexity, I think, is part of it. And then how do I say it? It's getting enough information to make good decisions. I think that's one of the things that I struggle with is, making sure, like sort of sometimes the bigger the issue, the less information we get. And so, because it's easy to do some of the, little things, but when you've got a really big or contentious issue, it's kind of hard sometimes to pull it all together. And the select board is all volunteers mostly. We get paid a little bit, but not a lot. And the staff is working, doing the best they can. They've got they've got a million other things going on. And so I think I think that, and it's public, and people are always going to be upset one way or the other. I'm kind of clueless. I have the ability to let it roll off me, and I think that's very helpful. If you have, if you care too much about how people think, or you don't have confidence, you can, it can be pretty tough to be in that situation, and you make some tough decisions, and the public can be pretty ruthless, So you have to be able to handle that.
One thing I've heard from people that I've spoken to about you is that whether they agree with you or they don't, they will say that you're always willing to engage in a civil discourse. Where do you think that came from, your ability to kind of not get too emotional in it, let it roll off you?
I think it's trying to give people respect, I think. And it's also trying to understand both sides. I think a lot of times it's easy to say it's only this way and it's my way. But I think sometimes you have to look at if you don't listen to some other people, then you don't have a chance to change your mind, or you don't have a chance to change your mind a little bit because it might make what you think better. And so I think it's partly from that, and it's partly from, I think, my mom sort of saying, treat people the way you'd like to be treated. Like, I don't like to be ignored. I wouldn't, if I bothered, like I say something natural all the time, if there's one person complaining, there's 15 others that want to but just didn't bother. So if one person comes and takes the time to write you a letter or to even to complain, that means that it's worth listening to most of the time. So
what made you decide to branch out to multiple different establishments on the island, going from just something natural to then having the bagel company, and then having, what was the place on Queequeg?
Queequeg was the downtown bagel.
Downtown bagel, yeah. Having multiple bagel companies.
Yeah, we had 2 bagel companies, yeah.
What was your
And that was when there actually were employees downtown in the winter. There aren't employees downtown anymore. We moved everybody out, unfortunately. So.
What was your decision making for deciding to branch out?
I think it's business-wise, just wanting to do it, I think. But then I got to the point where I had 100 employees, and I was running, I was running around a little too much, and I got to the point where you had to have sort of a real management structure. I can handle like 50, 60 people. I know most of the names. By the end of the summer, hopefully I know all of them. But when I got to be 100 people, then all I spent my time in was meetings. I couldn't go in and kid around with people. I couldn't go in and teach it as much because I was too busy. And so I kind of learned sort of my limitations or my strengths, however you look at it. And so what I did is I sort of decided, okay, let's sell this and get back to the mothership, which is where I still am now,
You authored the island's first proposal to limit cars in 2000. In the 20 years since that petition, how do you feel we are addressing that issue, and do you feel any different now than you did then?
I don't feel any different. I think really, I'm not sure it's going to ever happen because people, are in love with their cars. I think that what we're seeing now, it's kind of funny because I listen to people go, oh, who could have predicted? Who knew? And like about the traffic on Old South, et cetera. And I'm like, it was the consultants we hired 20 years ago knew. We didn't listen to them, but they told us we were going to be at gridlock when we hit 25, 30,000 cars, and that's where we are. And then one of the things that they predicted was what happens. I asked them, what will happen if we, have 35 or 40? And they said, well, eventually you'll close downtown and, close Main Street, and it'll get a little busier around, and you'll have to close a couple other streets. And this is what's happened in Aspen and other places, Vail. And then they say, once you do that, then you get really busy going in and out. So then one street has to be turned into, taxis and trucks. The truck route and taxis will only be allowed on that, which makes everything else busier. And so that's kind of where we're heading if we kind of do nothing. And so I've been trying to, put demand management principles in for the parking here. I've been trying to limit cars. And I think what I've kind of come to, one of the things I say is, what's our gondola? There was, in Telluride, Colorado, they had 2 towns that were linked by a road like 12 miles up and down this road with buses. And they were free buses, but the cars were going back and forth. And they did is they put a gondola from one town to the other. And it's free, and all their traffic went away. And people love it. It's a much better way to get from one side to the other. And so I look at Nantucket and say, going forward, what can we do that's like that gondola? What can we do that's a better alternative than vehicles and that people will want to be in? And I had friends recently that were on an island down in Florida, and they had a rental car. One of the things that scares me is when you go to Florida, Hawaii, and you just see thousands and thousands of rental cars. That's what's starting to happen on Nantucket. We limited them. It's not happening now. Long story. But you have all these cars, so people get in the rental car, but they go to this island and they didn't use the rental car once. They were hopping on a bus, and the bus took them to the beach and took them downtown, and they met other families as they were driving around the island. And I'm thinking, and the island was, I can't remember the name of it, but it's about the same size as here. It has about the same amount of people, but they said, I go, what was the traffic like? They said, there wasn't any. They're just all these buses riding around all day. And I think that we need to get somewhere like that, whether it's, it's a gondola sounds crazy, but is it a gondola? Is it, do we fix the bus system with the money from the paid parking? How do you find a way to make that more, to make that a more agreeable thing than sitting in traffic, so.
Do you think with the prevalence of Uber and Turo, it's caused more havoc on the island?
Absolutely, yes. And I think I look at some of that stuff, this is my Boy Scout side coming out, it's just not fair. When one person has to pay taxes and do it this X, Y, and Z, and someone can do what do you call it, a gig economy or online and avoid the taxes or avoid the regulation or not pay as much as somebody else, of course they're going to do better. And so in some ways, I think it's those things are just kind of sneaky, So, I mean, and so that's, I think the whole Turo thing, I looked on that the other night and I sent it to Eric Mooney. I'm like, is this really legal? There's 200 and something cars now. If we cap rental cars at 700 and now we've got 200 Turo, what are we doing? So, and the other thing I've noticed, I can sort of tell this is a combination of all this. I can combine the, we track our bread sales. You know this, they don't know this. A couple of us know. We track the bread sales every day. How many loaves we bake, how many come back. And I've been doing that for, 30 years. And that will pretty much tell me how many people are here on island. Every 15 gallon, every 240 loaves of Portuguese bread represents about 10,000 people. And so when we're at peak and we're doing 6 or 7 of them, there's 50, 60,000 people here. We're in the winter and we're doing 1, there's 10 or 15, And what I've noticed is that the peaks are higher, but then they go away. Like we used to go up 20%, on a weekend, and now it doubles. So it's, I think we've kind of, so with everything, we've just kind of, a little bit of something is good and too much of it isn't. And I think that we're trying to do too much at times.
there's always been discussions of having a new downtown. I was doing research and I heard about the Cobblestone Village back in the day. I think it was near the airport. They were thinking about it, and back then I think they called it Nantucket Commons, which I think is Mid-Island now.
Yeah.
Do you believe that downtown should eventually be moved, or do you think there should be a new one, or do you think that with the overabundance of traffic, we should have another place for people to gather?
I think the answers to a lot of those questions are either in the comp plan from before, which was talked about, nodes and density in certain areas, and it's in our history. If a lot of the things that we struggle with, we don't follow. If you just looked around, we put a lot of people in the downtown on Nantucket. There's, and originally these are shorter buildings than we originally had. Main Street was originally, I think, 4 stories high on parts of it, and so, but we're sort of following 70s zoning from, the rest of the island we zoned suburban from Providence, Rhode Island. And we think that's the right thing. And I think the right thing for Nantucket is to follow, what we've done before with row houses and tall buildings, but not everywhere. I think the hinterland should stay, country should stay country. And, but we should be putting more density in the Mid-Island area, and we should be doing it in a way that, we add the density, and if you add density, some of it has to be either year-round housing or affordable housing. Give bonuses so when people are developing those lots, it turns into something like downtown here. It ends up looking, something really nice that you'd want to live in, and a great place to walk. And and people around the whole United States, the whole world, they're copying Nantucket. They're copying Savannah, Georgia, and New Orleans and places with new urbanism, and they're building these new towns, and we're not doing that. So I think that we could, that was one of the things I almost did. I almost went to, you asked earlier, I almost went to the University of Miami and and did a internship there. They invited me, 15, 20 years ago, and they were working on all these kind of things. And it's really interesting. Like, I think that's, the answers that we need here now are in our history. We just have to, it was big buildings. We had big hotels. The Dreamland is like half of one of them, if I remember, So we had like big buildings that could put a lot of people in a nice way that would look good. So.
Nantucket's community has had a long-term worry of the over-commercialization of the island. Knowing what you know now, what are your thoughts on some of the contentious issues Nantucket has had, such as, if we're going back a while, Beinecke's arrival on island and his massive purchase of downtown, or even another maybe lesser-known one is Kennedy's Nantucket Sound Islands Trust Bill, and now currently the move to ban short-term rentals.
Oh boy, do I take them one at a time? You did your homework. You even knew what the name of the Kennedy bill was. I'm impressed. Yeah. Were you at the NHA?
Yeah, I might be. I wish.
Yeah, well, you might have been doing a little digging.
Yeah. So we'll go with.
I'll go chronologically. Kennedy bill.
Yep.
That was very contentious. It's a good example of sort of the two sides of the island. And before my mom died, she said that was one of the things that she resents not having supported. Yeah. She got talked into it by a couple of the builders that it was going to ruin the island. And by the time she was 66, 67, she was had realized that if she had, the place that she moved to would have been relatively the same if she had supported the Kennedy bill. It was, and she didn't. And so that was and I think that was a recognition of the, sort of how special the island was, and how do you preserve it. And it wasn't going to preserve it and not ever change it. It was going to preserve it with the ability for the islanders, et cetera, to still live here. And it was still going to be land available, et cetera. There was a lot of things in it. And, but that was contentious because people didn't want to be, government or anyone intruding on them, et cetera. And, and then zoning came in after that, and a lot of other things came in. And a lot of that is all politics and people sort of negotiating for their own benefit. And I think it's, so I look back at that. I wasn't really around for that, but I've read about it, and my mom and talked about it. Then what was your next one? Chronologically, the next one would be Barnaky. I think he did a lot of good for the island, and he was a lot of what you see was because of his vision, and Larson and a few others that bought the land, etc. There's a misconception that that we're losing tax revenue. It's cheaper to have land sit in conservation, and it doesn't cost you anything. There's no utilities. There's nothing else. It costs you like 90 cents, 97 cents to have have a dollar worth of conservation land. It costs you $1.05 for $1 worth of developed land every year. And so that has actually helped us. It's kept our taxes low. It's helped us, and it's kept the island really nice. And it saved some of the vistas and the things that were originally here. I would say he also, and so I think some of the vision, my understanding was, the land bank came out of some of those initiatives, from Barnaky and others. There was one of my favorite stories is the Islanders wanted to cobble Main Street, and they saw that as progress. And the Off-Islanders, I'm simplifying a little bit, but they didn't want to. And the Inquirer Mirror took the side of the Off-Island of the Islanders, and they were writing things in the newspaper to cobble the Main Street, and then so the Off-Islanders boycotted the Inky, and they didn't buy the Inky, and they did their own newspaper called the Cobble for a couple years, and finally they turned enough hearts and minds around that we didn't cobble Main Street, which I can't even imagine. Right? Like, imagine if we had cobbled it. Like, it's it's one of the nicest places.
You mean tar it, right?
Tar, yeah. They would have tarred it. Imagine we tarred it. And so I mixed it up. So that's okay. And so then you go to like today, and you look at the whole short-term rental thing, and I think it's very similar. A lot of the positions that I'm hearing from different people, and I talk to all sides. I talk to everybody about it, and I have through the whole thing. A lot of it is self-serving. A lot of it is people worried about their own positions, and I think we have to step back and say what's the right position, what's the right thing for the island, and I think that's sometimes hard when people have sort of gone off into their corners and it's yes or no, and I think what I see has changed here is just sort of there's more higher demands, there's more people, and the demands are even higher on all of us. There's more pressure on everybody, but it's also speed. I think, the high-speed boat, I think, was almost a turning point. It does a lot of really good things. It gets our sports teams off, and they give us a good deal and everything. But it's made it possible for people to look at the weather and decide whether they want to come that weekend or not. And they come over that morning. Oh, it's raining a little bit. I won't come over. It used to be you had to rent for a week or 2 weeks, and you would get here, and it would rain for like 3 days in a row, and the family would go, oh boy, it's raining, what are we going to do? And they'd schlep the kids off to the Whaling Museum and do this and that. They'd do all those things, and they would get a love for the island, and they get really attached to those aspects. I think a lot of it is people are not appreciating some of those things, some of the history and some of that, and I think they're more, it's more about just the beach and your favorite restaurant, or your favorite restaurant or your favorite club. And I think it's not, and it's different. And so I think, sort of the speed of life, the instantaneousness of it has definitely put sort of more pressure on Nantucket, and it's not necessarily in a good way, I don't think.
A common theme I've heard is the polarization of the island lately.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience of that, and do you also feel the same way that the island has become more decisive and a little less civility?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's different. It's more. I don't know if. I think the word I would say kind of a little more privatized. People are off, and there was always a bit of that, but at the same time, you go fishing, and sort of the head of the bank, Bank of Boston, or head of Fleet or whatever was out next to you fishing, and people, and you could, a lot of the people then, they were kind of Yankees, and and they wore their chinos and their buttons down, so they were fraying off them, and it was it wasn't as much of a it wasn't as flash as it is now, You know, I think that, but if you look at, if you look at different places like Nantucket, different tourist towns, you get to a point where you're known for one thing, and eventually, though, that is wobbling, and they'll start something else. Like you look at the Hamptons, and they're talking about, party houses and big bars and events, and because the business side of the island, the business side of the community, is still going to want more, and they're going to want more of this and more of that, and some things are not necessarily good for the island in a way. You have to think about the common good, the commonwealth, not just your own personal dollar, I think.
It reminds me to some degree of an article I read while researching about Nantucket in 1989. The New York Times came out with an article called Changed Nantucket, Unchanged Nantucket. And they interviewed people around. I believe they interviewed, at the time, the owner of this place called the Camera Shop, where he said that with the rents increasing the way they are, I'm going to be leaving next year due to my lease. And I believe that at the time they were talking about the mass, it cost, back then they said that there's no way you can get a house on Nantucket for less than $1,000 a week.
Yeah.
Which now looks,
You could get a room or a bed.
Yeah, you can get a bed for $1,000 a week. And one of the things I even found interesting was if you talk to people now, they talk about the way they wish Nantucket was, like it was before. But in 1989, cars were coming out with the bumper sticker of "I like Nantucket the way it was before," and that was 34 years ago now. So it seems like to some degree they're always having some debate over something's changing and they don't like it.
Yeah, you're always going to remember a place, from your perspective. That's 100% true. But there's also choices that you make that you can't undo. And you'd asked like about Barnaky, and I got, some of the good things he did. He liked artisans, and he made sure that he wanted the guy. He didn't want, Macy's. He wanted the guy who worked at Macy's who did the crystal better. Thought he did it better than the Macy's people did. He started the looms, and they brought people in to teach people how to do handwork, and they started a school for a lot of the island guys to learn how to do carpentry, to preserve the buildings. And so he had that sort of vision. And one of the things he told, I was fortunate to talk to him a little bit near the, 15 years ago before the end. And he said one of the things he looks back and wish he could have changed is wish that he didn't have every house become rental. And when he went up to Newburyport, he was advising the Lagasse family, who owned it at the time, and NAR, or Carp owns it now, owns a lot of it. But he advised them to don't do what Nantucket did, because you lose your balance. You want your town, if you want to have a town, and you want to have people in your town and have a community, there needs to be a place for those people to live. And he was advising them in Newburyport to build big hotels on the water and do more of that. And we went down a path where we said we don't want that. And I think looking back, if you could change it, I think we would have been much better off building a few of those things, than, and solidifying, 2 or 3 nodes that were commercial nodes, as opposed to how we've done it.
If Barnaky were alive today, what do you think he'd think of Nantucket?
I think he'd be pretty psyched about it. I think he'd still think he had a good impact on it, and I think he'd still think it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, because it is. So I think it's, but it doesn't mean you can't look and say, it's like when we work in the bakery. Not every day, no day goes perfect. Yeah. You can always look back and say, oh, we should have done that better, or we could have done that better. I think there's things like that we as a community have to be a little more honest about doing if we want to sort of retain as much of what makes it special as we can.
You're passionate about preserving the history of Nantucket. Can you tell me why it's so important to you and how the island can help preserve the historic landmarks and buildings?
I think it's unique, and it's a human scale. It's how people, sort of it's at a scale that people enjoy. Like, you intrinsically enjoy it. We could build up parts of it a little bigger, et cetera, but it's intrinsically at a good level. You can walk, and it's funny if you look from the bank to shop down there is the same distance as the Stop and Shop to the school. But people don't really walk from the Stop and Shop in Mid-Island up to the school. But down here, people walk all over. And you think about why is that? And it's because of the way it's built. It's, it's pedestrian friendly. It's got places to walk and stop and look at things. And it's, it's not just a raceway with cars. I think we have the solution to how we have to build out other parts of the island as we grow, and we need to copy it, And so I think you have to preserve the buildings, but you also have to preserve, sort of the style and how it was done. And you also, by doing that and giving some sort of incentive to have year-round people or affordable, give benefits, give bonuses for that, you preserve your community too. And I think it's sort of a combination of things. I think we have to, and also some of this when it's gone, it's gone. I think I'm really, Sheila and I are really proud of her shop. It's on Orange Street at Flock, because that was that could have easily been torn down or built, and it would be indistinguishable. The guy who built it, he built it late 1800s. And he built 5 or 6 of them around the island. There were 2 or 3 up by the monument on Main Street. I think there was a couple there and one in another spot. And one of them was 106 Main Street, which is way before your time, but the land bank got a donation and they knocked it down. And the preservationists laid in front of the trucks and tried to stop them, and it didn't happen. And it was in the New York Times, and it was a big deal when it happened. And there was, oh, well, this is dangerous, it's gonna fall down. Well, I went over and looked, and the crane was lifted off the ground. They put it over the top, trying to pull the thing down. The crane was off the ground, it was not going anywhere, but someone wanted their view or whatever. So that was, so the facade of that was taken off. It was put on land bank property for a while. They wanted it gone. It was put on Union Street in a yard down on Union Street. And then when we were doing, when Sheila bought the building, and the way we bought it, they were walking by, Sheila and Ruby were walking, and they came in and they said, geez, Matt, if we don't buy it, someone else is gonna buy it and ruin it. I'm like, oh God, okay, let me think about it. And they knew I was a softie, so we did it. And we went out and we measured the facade that had come from Main Street. It was exactly the same size. So we kind of knew, we said, okay. And then Peter, who works for me, Peter Fernandez, did such an amazing job putting it back up.
He's also one of the people who'll be talking.
Who are we going to talk to? Who has even a better story than me? But we'll save that. He is, but in that, you look at that, and that shows, so much of what Nantucket was then in that one building. That building had, the front facade was to attract business. The business people lived in the back of their little, of the little stores, or they lived next to it in the house next door, and it was. Italianate. It was a certain style at the end of that period, and you sort of look at that, and they were serving all the little areas that served that area, and there was the markets where the people were, but they were at the cheaper parts of it. When we were doing the renovation, we noticed that the foundation was all charred stone from the buildings down here in the Great Fire, and the inside walls were all reused. And when you go in, you see the beams in there. The beams are all different. And some have been cut with saws, but some have been cut with adze. They chipped them all, so they're really rough. So it was all reused. And I think, that's a perfect example of if you don't protect the history and protect the buildings inside and out, don't have some appreciation for it, you lose your history, and you lose something, I believe.
What's your favorite building or landmark? A couple of them, if you have any.
What was my favorite?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let me think about. I like this. Even Something Natural's got a great story.
It's true.
It's one of my favorites is the Sea Cliff Inn. It's not there anymore,
Yeah.
But that was across the street. And so the Something Natural building was one of the, I think it was the farmhouse or the bunkhouse for the Sea Cliff Inn, and it was actually on Cliff Road. So when you drive out of the Something Natural parking lot on the right, there's a foundation, and there was a 3-story Victorian that was the Sea Cliff Annex, and that burnt down. And then there was the Something Natural building, and then there was another one. So fronting the street, there were 3 other houses, and across where Horchow and those guys live on the far side of the road, there was a huge, like 3-4 story, massive hotel. And it was still around when I was a kid. We used to play around, go under it and around it and sneak in and stuff. And it was torn down, I think 69 or 70, and it was, but so different. People look at the Nantucket Inn or Nantucket Hotel and they think, oh, that's so, that's not Nantucket. And it's like, well, that one's tame compared to what the, Seacliff Inn looked like. And so I think I think stuff like that, and there's some beautiful buildings downtown too. This building's great. The, Pacific National Bank, I have a soft spot for that. There's some pretty amazing buildings here, but I think, we've also lost some ones that, that we could replicate or bring back at some point.
Before leading into the final question I'll ask you, I'm just going to ask you a couple quick questions, just to get your little quick fire questions.
This is a speed round?
Yeah, let's call it that. Why not? Speed round. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh no, I'm not speedy on that.
It's okay.
Keep going. Pass. I'll think about it. I'm not speedy.
If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Yeah.
Skip.
Go.
Next one. If you could travel anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
Anywhere in the world.
Yep. Your pick.
Right now, Hudson, New York.
Hudson, New York.
Yep.
All right, that's an interesting one.
I've been dreaming about that one.
What's one thing on your bucket list that you haven't accomplished yet?
Retirement.
There you go. That's a good one. Yeah. What's your favorite way to unwind and relax after a long day?
After a long day, walking the dogs, having a beer. Yep.
There you go. All right, that's a good one.
And I do the starter for Sheila every night. So that's my end of the day now.
Wow, that's nice. All right, well, I'll go into the last question then because we're wrapping up here. And what do you envision for the future of Nantucket, considering its rich history, unique character, and the evolution and the evolving challenge it faces? What are your thoughts on how the island can preserve its cultural heritage while embracing progress and addressing the needs of both residents and visitors?
This isn't a quick. I don't have to do this quick.
No, you take your time with this one. If it was quick, I'd be surprised.
No, Nantucket has always changed. So there, so that's like trying to freeze it in a certain bubble, the way you remember it when you got here, etc. I think that that is unrealistic. But I would hope that the changes that we do make are for. I hope that we follow our history. I hope we look. I hope we learn from the past. We're not necessarily great at that. We always think things can't, it can't be like that. That won't work. That's always the Nantucketers' first thing, is that, that won't be possible. Like, we didn't think you could put fires out with a hose. I've told you that story. Yeah, and we had the guy said, oh yeah, after the Great Fire, yeah, you can do that. And they went up and they made a water tower, made a water tank up high and had a hose and shot it over the Congregational Church, and everyone's like, oh yeah, I guess you can. And so, so we have some things that we have to solve that are, sort of affordable housing is a big one. How are we gonna, find a way to incentivize? And I don't think it can all be with money. I don't think that the taxpayers can, foot the bill for 4,000 more units somehow. I don't think that's gonna work. We have to find, sort of creative ways to do that. And I think and that housing's just one thing. I think preserving the environment, making sure that we don't ruin the aquifer, making sure the waters are still clean, dealing with sea level rise and those issues, which I believe are real. We've got a good plan for that, and there's, but it's going to take, we're going to be doing it for the rest of, 50, 100 years here. It's not going to stop tomorrow. But I think that if we could find a way to be doing it for taking in everyone, sort of doing it for the common good rather than individuals. I think if we could find a way to talk to each other and respect each other and, sort of do it for the right intentions, then I think Nantucket has a pretty unique place and will remain that way. And I think, I've always, so when I ran the first time for selectmen, I said, sort of green is good. If we do things that are good for the island, good for the environment and good for the island, that it'll come back to all of us, in dollars and in, for business and in, quality of life. And I still kind of believe that. I think if we do the right thing, even though sometimes it's hard, or it might cost some of us some money, I think in the long run, we'll end up a richer place for it.
Are you pessimistic or optimistic on the future of Nantucket?
I would say I'm optimistic. Okay. Yeah, people think I'm a little, because I'm the only one sometimes that speaks up, or sometimes they think that I'm not. But I'm still, I'm still getting up every day and chasing people like you around. So
that's fair.
That keeps me young and optimistic.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before this interview is over?
I think that we should come back at the end and I should interview you as your last.
I would hate that. No way.
Yep, that's going to be the last interview in this series.
I'm not the interview type. Well, I'd like to say thank you so much, Matt Fee, for being a part of this. Thank you for everybody who showed. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.